Thank you, Chris, for the introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I must say it is quite a treat to be in a room full of people. It's been a long time coming. So affordable housing and social housing is a topic that's extremely close to my heart. It's been something that I've been advising on for the past 10 years in various capacities, mainly with the New South Wales Government. Before we hear from the panel, bear with me whilst I share some eye-watering statistics in terms of articulating the need for more social and affordable housing in the West. These stats have come from a publication titled Home in Western Sydney, which was released last year and sponsored by Wentworth Community Housing and the Western Sydney Community Forum. 33% of rental households in Western Sydney are in rental stress. Rental costs increased at a greater rate than incomes, with most areas showing a higher price to income gap compared to Greater Sydney. The New South Wales social and affordable housing supply only met 40% of total demand. And Chris alluded to the fact earlier that there were over 46,000 social and affordable housing dwellings in Western Sydney compared to demand of 110,000. At just 40% of demand, closing this gap will require a minimum of almost 6,500 new dwellings per year by 2036. The aspiration of home ownership became more unrealistic as capital values have grown at a faster rate than Greater Sydney overall for the 5 years through to 2020. And finally, Cumberland LGA has some of the highest homelessness rates in Greater Sydney. So housing affordability has been a hot topic for the last 10 years, but it's probably fair to say that now's the time to act, particularly in a post-COVID world. The New South Wales Government's commitment to build 1,200 new social homes and refurbish many more is a positive step in the right direction, but nothing compared to the $5 billion invested in the Victorian market. Some of the challenges, key themes that I wanted to speak to the panel about today relate to supply. We must up the ante on the supply side. There is only so much that Landcom and LAC, both of whom are state-owned corporations and self-funded, and the CHP market can do. Is there a bigger role that private developers can play, and what will it take for them to get there? Incentives. Can we be firmer and more consistent on planning-led mandates and abolish what at times can lead to perverse outcomes for our communities? Innovation. Whilst I've been encouraged by the partnering of institutional developers with the CHPs and the tremendous impact NIFIC's cheap finance solutions provide, are there any further innovative design or financing solutions that we need to have a close look at? Matthew, I might start with you. Landcom's mandate has been varied over the years, but most recently, and particularly over the last 3 years, its primary mandate is to focus on increasing the affordable housing supply and diversity of housing. What are some of the things that you are doing and what outcomes have been realised?
Well, thanks. Well, thanks for the introduction on Landcom. You must have been looking at my notes. And apologies on behalf of Tasha Burrell. Your program says Tasha, I'm pinch hitting for her. She's not well today. So you're quite right. Housing affordability, diversity and supply is a key focus of ours, as is working in partnership with others to do it, and also leadership, especially on the sustainability front. None of those are new things for Landcom, and neither is our sort of top line of Landcom being there to deliver more affordable and sustainable communities, which is really just a retweak of our previous building better communities. I think what we've done is really just define what we meant by better in terms of affordability and sustainability. So none of the ideas are new, it's just a redefining or an articulation and a re-emphasis on what we think we can make a difference on. So that being said, with it not being necessarily new, we've done other projects trying to tackle affordability and diversity. I think of projects like Thornton, which was a 50-hectare demonstration project, where we did everything from 21st century terraces through to apartments, but importantly what I'd highlight is the partnership that was forged between PACE and Evolve to deliver about 268 affordable housing dwellings as part of an apartment complex as one model. My recollection on that, because it's a bit dated now, is that it probably worked with top-up from NRAS. We've done other projects, and I'd call out things that we've done in partnership with people like Fraser's at Edmondson Park, where we've delivered on terraces and Fonzie flats to provide a lot more diversity and affordable price points. Previously, we've dabbled in finding price points for first home buyers and people in low to moderate income by sort of doing a selective process to engage with them. And that brings us to the present, where Landcom is now targeting a minimum of 5%, but an aspiration of at least 10% across all of its projects in terms of affordable housing. And what we're trying to target there really is looking at the low to moderate income housing levels. And we've got some already successful in the marketplace with our City Metro Northwest Places project in partnership with City Metro. And at Tullawong, we've sold a site to Daycorp, who will deliver 5% affordable housing as part of that development. And what we've seen is it's critical to engage. If you want to really amp it up, we need to engage more directly with the community housing provider sector as part of that process. It is a bit newer to us, so we've elected to start relatively small by putting two projects that are currently in the market, one at Lauchlan's Line, where we'll deliver 260-something apartments through a direct engagement with a community housing provider, and at the other end of the scale we have a project at Queenscliff where we're undertaking an adaptive reuse of the former Queenscliff Community Healthcare Centre, which, drum roll please, will deliver 36 dwellings, of which we'll look for as much as we possibly can on that to deliver affordable housing by engaging with a community housing provider. The key thing there is we're pulling a lot of levers and different buttons to make it all work, so it's a bit experimental, and I think that's what's needed.
You referenced the CHP sector in a number of those examples, and they're hugely important in the delivery of new social and affordable housing. A question for you, Annette. There's not a month that goes by where I don't see an announcement from St George Housing opening another building, and you're doing some fantastic stuff in the marketplace. But I feel as though we're only touching the sides in terms of delivering new social housing and affordable housing within the CHP sector. Is there anything that can be done to sort of up the ante in that regard?
There certainly is. I think that the CHP sector has grown in its capability over the last 10 years. I know we have our own development arm at SGCH, and we've started engaging with some of the larger developers and forming partnerships to build more housing. But you're right in saying more needs to be done. I know that there, in some places in Western Sydney, too few in my estimation, there have been voluntary planning agreements. A lot of those are not about delivering affordable housing, and they really need to be. We would like, in fact, to see 10% of all rezoned land or upzoned land available for community housing. Now, that might mean that land becomes available at concessional rates to take into account the fact that a social or affordable housing project is not necessarily going to generate the income that a housing development that's targeted at the private market would do. But there needs to be some sort of major step change. I think the figures are very compelling about the extent of housing need. We're prepared to do our part in that, and certainly we've had the backing of institutional investors. We've refinanced through NIFIC. That's been fantastic for us and has given us not only lower interest rates but a little capital pool that we can use to invest in new projects. But we do need more to come, whether it's from local government or whether it's from government more innovative thinking to get the larger scale projects going.
So we're lucky to have Campbell, Hanan here from Mirvac on the panel, and BTR has obviously had a significant focus in the marketplace over the last 2 or 3 years, and Mirvac has delivered the first BTR development in Western Sydney at Olympic Park. Campbell, keen to hear from you in relation to how that as an asset class and an emerging asset class in the Australian marketplace is a potential solution to housing affordability.
Great, thanks James. So build to rent is a new housing typology for Australia, but it's certainly not new globally. It is essentially apartment rentals. However, there is no strata titling of apartments and there is single institutional ownership. The big difference for your traditional apartment rental is that pretty much for every single apartment we try to create anywhere between 5 and 8 square metres of common communal amenity space. So this includes things like co-working areas, gymnasiums. It includes parcel storage for the staggering amount of parcels that are now delivered, of which people are always at work and are not at home to receive them. It involves food storage, cold storage and all sorts of different amenities. And I guess the interesting challenge that we've found with this asset class, well not really a challenge but an opportunity, is when we surveyed, we've had a number of independent surveys done of renters around Australia. Around about 50% of renters will claim that general maintenance on the place they live doesn't happen, and 83% of them will claim that they are fearful of raising maintenance issues with their landlords for fear of losing their tenure. And so the big difference with build to rent is that it's designed for long-term rental. Tenure is guaranteed, so there is no way that someone can be removed from their tenure unless their behaviour is something which may warrant it. So the first job to solve for us was security of tenure. The second was things like pet friendliness and ability to create your own style of apartment living, whether it's painting walls or hanging your own pictures. Some of the most simple things that we take for granted are things that are often not allowed in a rental premise. So build to rent is sort of creating this whole new stream. I guess the lesson learned for us, which has been fascinating, is on the back of sort of pet friendliness and security of tenure, Sydney Olympic Park has now secured tenants from almost everywhere. So initially the focus for us when we opened in September that we'd have a very local campaign around local renters in a 10-kilometre catchment from Sydney Olympic Park. The reality now is we've got tenants from the Central Coast, Vaucluse, Bondi, Mossman, in fact all over the Sydney Basin, because all of them are asking for the same thing. They want security of tenure, they want something that's pet friendly, and they want amenity that allows them to disassociate the concept of working from home, where everything blends into the workday, versus being able to move separately to that and have co-working environments within the building. So for us it's been a really interesting opportunity. I guess the next step is we're now starting to see downsizes, which really goes to the affordability element. So people who are selling their family home, releasing their equity to retire on and then becoming long-term renters without the fear as they get older that they may lose title of their tenure. So certainly now, over time, we think that this will change the nature of what downsizing could look like in this market.
And we'll stay with BTR for now. One of the challenges we've seen in getting sort of traction in the marketplace is the affordability play from a developer's perspective in terms of a viable development, particularly in the Sydney market because of the high cost of land. The land tax discount for BTR assets is a step in the right direction, which was the New South Wales government announcement this year. Keen to get your views on how materially that moves the dial from an affordability perspective in enabling you to build more BTR developments. And then similarly, the most recent announcement in the latest budget around the stamp duty changes, what your views are in relation to how that will impact affordability.
There's a lot in that. I guess the interesting thing with affordability from a Sydney perspective, and this isn't limited to Western Sydney, it's relative to the whole Sydney basin, is that affordability in terms of what percentage of your income you can afford to pay in rent is a very, very significant element in how people think about housing affordability. And so the premise that we've taken at Build to Rent is if we've now introduced a no bond policy. So again, that makes a significant impact up front for people's affordability, but we also rely on the fact that people can only afford to pay up to 35% of their monthly salary in rent. So when you look at the difference in salaries around Australia and then you look at the difference in land values around Australia, it's no great surprise that land values in Sydney are higher than Brisbane and Melbourne, but salaries are somewhat consistent. And so the concept of affordability for us to build to rent in Sydney is particularly difficult. So we're targeting a yield on cost of around about 4.5%, which is extremely tight. And this is where land tax, and particularly the work of the state government here around land tax, becomes significantly important, because land tax relief for us will allow that affordability measure to add about 20 basis points of return on yield on cost, which has a significant impact for us in terms of the affordability of being able to build these things. And to give you a sense of sort of the valuation mechanics of build to rent, if you're building an asset on a 4.5% yield on cost, it's sort of being valued in at around about a 4% cap rate. That 4% cap rate is holding true pretty much in any market in Australia, but the difference being the yield on cost metrics in Melbourne and Brisbane are between 50 and 150 basis points higher. So what you're seeing now as an industry is a huge amount of activity happening in Melbourne and growing activity happening in Brisbane, and everyone's scratching their head about the affordability impact of Sydney. And so that's something that we need to continue to address, and it's really refreshing to see government working with industry to see how we can create a whole new asset class in response. And just on stamp duty, you know, I think this is again great policy from government. If you think of the average home buyer, first home buyer in New South Wales is well into their mid-30s. And by the time you save for a 10% deposit, 5% stamp duty, and then the remaining deposits required by banks as part of their loan-to-value ratio requirements, you've got a huge amount of saving required to make the concept of buying your first home viable. Just removing stamp duty and making it a amortised cost rather than an upfront cost certainly I think will change the nature of the age of the first home buyer, and I'd be surprised if first home buyer age groups don't end up lowering from their mid-30s down to a lower number in response.
Matthew, we might just jump back to you. You referenced, Landcom's primary objective is deliver, provide more land available to the marketplace and mandating 5 up to 10% ideally for affordable housing. Are you aware of any other examples of government intervention from around the globe that could assist in this regard?
Yeah, well, as was mentioned, you could have inclusionary zonings. Now, that's a planning term, but for me what it means is you've made it normal, not discounted, you've made it normal to deliver affordable housing as part of your project. Now, that's not a universal view across not even my own organisation, let alone the development industry and let alone the people that own land, because effectively that's where the discount would occur. Would that become normal? But picking up on that as a concept, if we had the conversation and it was properly implemented, it could be seen as normal. I think that would be a conversation worth elevating. It comes up every now and then we, as an industry, tend to quash it.
So the Greater Sydney Commission has been really vocal about this over the last sort of 2 or 3 years in terms of that 5 to up to 15% inclusionary zoning across the board. What needs to change within government to make that happen?
It's probably the best place to ask the government that one. It'd be similar to you asking me about tax regimes. Better to ask the tax people. Really, it's probably a bit more bravery. I think the people that have nominated that have been brave to bring it up. Why don't we get courageous about it and have the conversation?
And the local councils also play a part in that too, right, as the sort of planning authorities in many of these developments?
Yeah, councils play a role. I haven't met a council planner or politician who has been against the idea of affordable housing in their local government area. They know that it's an issue, no matter where they are. And, for instance, Northern Beaches Council, who would object to a lot of things in terms of development and development-related things, and boarding houses as a planning pathway, and using SEP 5, well, previously SEP 5, but retirement living SEPs, objecting to that. But once you lay affordable housing into the mix, they're a lot more supportive because they see that to have a lot of people come in to their local government area every day and then leave because they can't afford to live there is not right. So the councils have a role to play. They just need to embrace it. Part of the issue, I think, as a nut to crack, is community perception around affordable housing and what it means.
And that's probably not a bad segue into a question for Campbell in relation to the stigma associated with integrating social and affordable with private market rentals, for instance. So keen to hear your view, and I think that the attitude has changed quite a lot in the last 3 years in this regard, but what's your view from a Mirvac perspective in integrating social and affordable within your developments, assuming that the viability is not impacted?
Oh, look, I think you'll find that most institutions by their nature have great purpose and principles and conscience around these things. And so, we are massively supportive of the concept of affordable and social housing. I think the argument is always the same, that it comes down to what you can afford to do. And certainly we are really, really happy to work with all forms of government to try and ensure that we can create as much as possible.
So I'm just looking at the clock. We've got 3 minutes on the clock, so we might just close with 1 minute from each of you, just in terms of final thoughts in relation to what we can do as a community, particularly in the West, in delivering more homes and sort of reducing that gap. So we'll start with you, Annette.
Okay, this is a tall order, but if we implemented that 10% target for affordable housing, if we'd done that over the last 20 years in Western Sydney, it would have meant the delivery of 890 affordable housing units every year over those 20 years. We would put up our projects that we build against any others in the private sector. We deliver value for money, so if you partner with us, we can deliver a really top quality unit for a lower cost because we don't have developers' margins. But we do need a bit of assistance to get us there, whether it comes from state government, local government, whether it comes from institutions, whether it comes from builders and developers. Then that's fantastic. We're really interested in talking with you.
So to build on that, I would see affordable housing being something that we need a recipe book on, rather than just one or two silver bullets. And to get that going, let's do some stuff. We talk about it a lot. There's been a lot of studies. It's time to do some things and learn from them.
And I would probably add that housing affordability is I think, James, as you started the conversation, driven a lot by supply. And so if we can create more housing stock, and this is where I think build to rent will play a very important role in the future, because unlike your traditional build to sell, this is not subject to the vagaries of market cycles. It's not subject to the vagaries of whether credit is available or not. This is an asset class which is built without tenants for tenants. It involves significant investment up front to make it happen. And as a result of that, it's very much an institutional style asset class. The one thing I would hope that we can open the dialogue with the federal government is how withholding tax for foreign investors could help us unlock a lot more faster delivery of build to rent around Australia by taxing a build to rent asset class is the same as you would tax an office building or an industrial shed.
Thanks, Campbell. Whilst you're on a roll, we have had one question from the floor, and I think you're probably best placed to answer it. The question is, will stamp duty changes enable developers to deliver more affordable stock for apartment buyers?
Oh, look, I think absolutely. This is, circa 5% that you don't have to find up front. So, to me, wherever you move a cash impediment up front, from a cost perspective, it gives increased flexibility for people to buy sooner. And so, for mine, I think it's a wonderful initiative that will have long-term ramifications for reducing the age of first-home buyers in Sydney.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please, round of applause for our panellists today. Thank you.